Family ties, loyalty, brotherhood, none of it mattered in the ruthless world of 90s hip-hop, and no one knows that pain better than Warren G. He wasn't just a rapper, he was the architect of G-Funk, the man who passed Dr. Dre the blueprint that built the Chronic, and the one who introduced the world to Snoop Dogg. He should have been celebrated as a cornerstone of the West Coast sound, but instead he was betrayed, pushed aside, and left fighting for scraps while others took the glory. For years, Warren kept his feelings buried, playing the role of the quiet peacemaker. But at 54, he isn't holding back anymore. The betrayals, the broken promises, the friendships turned sour. They've all come to light. These are the artists Warren G hated the most, and the untold story behind why. Starting at number 6, we have Garth Brooks. When people think about rivalries in music, they usually picture rappers going at each other on records or feuds that spill into interviews and tabloids. But back in 1997, Warren G found himself locked in one of the strangest battles ever seen in the industry, and his opponent wasn't a fellow rapper. It was Garth Brooks, the country superstar. Yes, you heard that right. Warren G versus Garth Brooks. And what they were fighting over wasn't a song, a beat, or even money. It was the letter G. To most people, a lowercase g is just another letter in the alphabet. But for Warren G, that letter carried his entire identity. His name had it, his sound had it, his whole brand was built around it. The G wasn't just a character, it was a symbol of authenticity. He was Warren G, the Long Beach rapper who helped shape the smooth, laid-back sound of G-Funk, which defined an entire era of hip-hop. The G wasn't something he borrowed, it was who he was. On the other side of this bizarre feud stood Garth Brooks. At the height of his fame, Brooks was getting ready to reinvent himself with a risky side project. He had created an alter ego called Chris Gaines, a fictional rock star, and the entire rollout for this new persona leaned heavily on a stylized lowercase g logo. What might have seemed like a harmless piece of marketing for Garth suddenly collided with something very real for Warren G. To him, it looked like the country icon was trying to co-opt a symbol that wasn't his to use. The clash quickly escalated into a legal battle, with both sides filing lawsuits. For fans watching from the sidelines, it felt surreal. Here was a rap pioneer and a country megastar battling in court not over melodies or lyrics, but over the right to own a single letter. Yet beneath the surface, this wasn't nearly as silly as it might have looked. It was about identity. For Warren G, protecting the G was protecting his name, his history, and the culture he represented. For Garth, it was about selling an experimental project to a global audience. One was personal, the other was purely commercial. In the end, the lawsuits fizzled out and were dropped by the following year, leaving no clear winner. But while the headlines disappeared, the episode left a lasting impression on Warren G's mindset. He wasn't the type to let anyone, whether it was a rival rapper or the biggest country star in the world, walk over him. Even something as simple as a single letter was worth standing up for if it meant defending his place in music history. This strange feud might look like a curious footnote today, but it revealed a lot about Warren G. He had built his reputation on being authentic, and he wasn't about to let anyone strip that away, no matter how powerful they were. If anything, it showed the world that Warren G was never just going to play along quietly. Moving on to number 5, we have Tupac. When Warren G talks about artists he had problems with, one of the most surprising names to come up is Tupac Shakur. On the surface, the two men respected each other and even created music that defined an era. But what many people don't know is that their relationship actually began with conflict. And it could have ended right there if Warren G hadn't stood his ground. It all started with something as basic as money. Warren had made 4 or 5 beats for Pac, charging about $1,500 each, but the payments weren't coming through, and that didn't sit right with him. For Warren G, the G in his name wasn't just a letter. It meant dignity. It meant not letting people walk all over you. And Pac, as big as he was, wasn't about to get a free pass. The situation finally boiled over one night at the Comedy Store. With Treach from Naughty by Nature watching, Warren pulled Pac aside and demanded what was owed. He wasn't loud or disrespectful, he was just direct. And in true Pac fashion, he respected that. He pulled out the money right there and paid him. For Warren, that moment stung. He saw Pac as a friend, someone he genuinely liked, so it hurt that business had to get in the way. But at the same time, it laid the foundation of respect between them. Pac saw that Warren wasn't afraid to check him, and from then on, their bond only grew stronger. That bond turned into music. After Warren was pushed aside at death row and left feeling like an outsider, Pac and MC Breed reached out. Pac had heard Warren's production on Indo Smoke from the Poetic Justice soundtrack and wanted that same magic. The result was Definition of a Thug In, a track that Pac recorded in just half an hour. What made it even more personal was that Pac worked Warren's own life stories into the lyrics. It wasn't just a song. It was Pac putting Warren's experiences into his voice, a gesture that said, "You're part of this." Their collaboration didn't stop there. Warren produced the beat for "How Long Will They Mourn Me," with Nate Dogg adding his unforgettable hook. That track became one of the most emotional tributes in Pac's catalog, and once again it showed the trust and respect he had for Warren. Ironically, it was Warren's distance from the death row machine that made this bond possible. While Dre and Suge were building their empire, Warren was carving out his own lane, and Pac valued that independence. Warren was so loyal to Pac that in 1995, when Pac was sitting behind bars, he actually planned to pay his $1.4 million bail himself. Think about that. At a time when most artists would have walked away, Warren was ready to put his own money on the line just to see Pac free. He wasn't looking for contracts or control. All he wanted in return was a verse. That's how much he valued the brotherhood they had built. But before he could make the move, Suge Knight swooped in with a bigger offer. Suge got Pac out in exchange for a 3-album deal with Death Row, and the rest is history. Even as things spiraled into the East Coast versus West Coast war, Warren G tried to be the calm voice in the storm. He spoke to the notorious B.I.G. himself, hearing Biggie's side of the story, and planned to bring that message back to Pac to cool things down. But by then, Pac was surrounded by Death Row's inner circle, and Warren couldn't get through. He still regrets that, because maybe, just maybe, if he had reached Pac in time, things could have turned out differently. For Warren G, Tupac will always be a complicated name. There was respect, there was friendship, but there was also conflict. He admired Pac's honesty, but he also knew how dangerous Pac's world had become once Death Row had him locked in. And while their relationship gave hip-hop some of its most timeless songs, it also left Warren with what-ifs that still linger decades later. At number 4, we have Suge Knight. If there was ever one man who could test Warren G's patience to the breaking point, it was Suge Knight. Their clash wasn't just business. It was personal, built on intimidation, power plays, and Warren's refusal to let anyone, not even the most feared figure in hip-hop, strip him of his dignity. From the very beginning, Warren and Suge didn't see eye to eye. Suge ruled Death Row Records with fear, making sure contracts got signed fast and without too many questions. That was his game, but Warren G wasn't about to let his friends get trapped like that. One day in the studio, when Suge's team started sliding contracts across the table, Warren quietly pulled one of the artists aside, some say it was Snoop Dogg himself, and told him something simple but dangerous. Don't sign that yet, get a lawyer first. To Suge, that advice was like a slap in the face. His whole business relied on keeping artists in the dark. And now here was Warren, the quiet, laid-back G-Funk kid blowing up his playbook. Suge heard what happened, and he wasn't about to let it slide. According to Warren, it didn't take long before Suge was storming through the place, shouting, "I blood, where Warren at?" What happened next became one of the scariest moments of Warren G's life. Suge caught him in an elevator, grabbed him, and made it clear he wasn't playing games. Warren wasn't some tough guy trying to start drama, but he also wasn't weak. He later admitted he had a .40 Glock on him that day, and in that moment, he had a choice: pull it and risk his life, or stand his ground another way. He looked Suge dead in the eye and told him straight, "You don't get your hands off me. I'm calling my brother, and I'm calling all my homeboys." That was Warren's way of saying he wasn't alone, and Suge knew it. Slowly, Suge let him go. That elevator confrontation became a turning point. Warren G had stared down the most intimidating man in music and lived to tell the story. But it also sealed his fate at Death Row. Suge wasn't going to let him flourish under his watch. Not after that. Years later, from prison, Suge tried to rewrite the story. He claimed it wasn't his fault. Warren never got signed to Death Row, blaming Dr. Dre instead. His words were cold. "If your own brother don't put you on the chronic, why should I?" It was a calculated jab, meant to twist the knife in the complicated relationship between Dre and Warren. But anyone who watched how Suge operated knew the truth. He thrived on control, and Warren wasn't someone he could control. And Suge didn't stop at just blocking Warren. He even got in the way of Warren's friends. Warren once revealed that he was about to sign Nate Dogg to Def Jam, a move that could have changed both of their careers. But before the ink could dry, Suge swooped in, pressuring Nate to join Death Row instead. That wasn't an accident. That was Suge flexing his muscle, showing Warren he had the power to take what he wanted. Looking back, Warren G has every reason to put Suge Knight's name on the list of artists and figures he hated crossing paths with. Their relationship wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a battle of survival. Warren wasn't scared to stand up for himself, even if it meant going against one of the most feared men in hip-hop. And that courage, that refusal to play Suge's game, might be the only reason Warren G walked away with both his career and his life intact. Snoop Dogg is number 3 on our list. When Warren G thinks about the people who hurt him most in the music business, Snoop Dogg's name still cuts the deepest. And that's because their story wasn't built on contracts or fame. It started long before the bright lights, back when they were just kids running around Long Beach. They went to the same schools, played on the same Pop Warner football team, and grew up as brothers before the world even knew their names. Warren would beatbox while Snoop rapped in high school battles, and along with their friend Nate Dogg, they formed 213, a group that would eventually shape the entire G-Funk sound. But it was Warren's loyalty that changed everything. Out of pure love for his childhood friend, he brought Snoop's demo tape to his stepbrother Dr. Dre. That single decision introduced Snoop Dogg to the world. Warren wasn't thinking about money or fame. He was thinking like a friend. He believed that if Snoop blew up, he would naturally look out for him in return. What Warren never expected was that this act of brotherhood would push him to the sidelines. Dre immediately saw Snoop's potential and signed him to death row, along with Nate. But Warren? He was left out. Suddenly, the trio they had built together was broken apart, and Warren was the one on the outside looking in. That wound never fully healed. Even Snoop himself has admitted it. In recent interviews, he's confessed that Warren carried years of pain and resentment, not toward him personally, but toward the way things unfolded. And Snoop wasn't blind to it either. He admitted that back then he felt f***ed up too, because while he was climbing to the top, his closest friend was left behind. It was a pain neither of them really knew how to deal with. That unspoken tension has followed them for decades, and it showed again in 2022 during one of the biggest moments of Snoop's career, the Super Bowl halftime show. For Warren, this was a historic event he helped make possible. Without him, Dre might never have met Snoop in the first place. Yet when he tried to get backstage just to hang out with his friends, he was turned away. He wasn't asking to perform. He wasn't looking for money. As he put it, "I just wanted to kick it with my people." Snoop's response only highlighted how far things had changed. He explained that when he's working with Dre, it's business first. "I don't bring nobody with me. I'm not responsible for nobody but me," he said. On paper, it makes sense. The Super Bowl isn't a backyard barbecue. It's a corporate show watched by millions. But to Warren, it felt like another reminder that the bond they once had, the brotherhood that had started in Long Beach, had been replaced by business walls and professional boundaries. For Warren G, that's where the hate creeps in. Not hate for the kid he grew up with, but for what the industry did to their friendship. The list of Warren G's hated artists will be incomplete without Dr. Dre. When Warren G looks back on his life, no relationship is more complicated, more painful, or more defining than the one with his own stepbrother, Dr. Dre. For most of his childhood, Warren didn't just look up to Dre, he idolized him. Dre was already a legend in the local DJ scene, and Warren wanted nothing more than to follow in his footsteps. Dre didn't just keep him at arm's length, he took him under his wing, teaching him the art of DJing, the power of a sampler, and even the gritty old-school way of splicing tape. That apprenticeship led Warren G straight into the heart of one of hip-hop's most iconic moments, the making of The Chronic in 1992. Behind the curtain, Warren was everywhere. He was the one digging through record crates, hunting for those soulful, funky loops that would eventually define the sound of G-Funk. He wasn't chasing money or fame. He thought of it as paying Dre back for everything he had taught him. In his words, it was the reward for you teaching me. But when The Chronic dropped, Warren's contributions were invisible. His name wasn't on the production credits. The royalties? Non-existent. His reward was a tiny voice credit on a skit. Years later, Warren admitted the harsh reality. "I didn't get no credit. I just wish I would have known about publishing back then, because that would be lovely right now." And if that felt like a slap in the face, what came next felt like betrayal. When Death Row Records was gearing up for its first big tour, Warren assumed he was part of the family he had helped build. He showed up at the airport, bags packed, ready to join. But there was no ticket waiting for him. No seat, no place in the empire he thought he belonged to. The message came loud and clear, straight from Dre. "You gotta be your own man." Why did Dre leave him out? The answers vary, depending on who you ask. Warren himself believed it came down to Suge Knight, who didn't like how Warren told a young artist to get a lawyer before signing a contract. Snoop Dogg saw it differently. He said there was pain and animosity all around, and it was just one of those wounds that never healed. Daz Dillinger, who also felt overlooked, claimed that the entire Death Row era was chaotic, with credit and money being distributed unfairly. And Suge? He said if Dre didn't want his own brother signed, then that was that. Some say Dre was trying to shield Warren from the dark, violent world of Death Row. Maybe that's true. But from Warren's perspective, it didn't matter why. What mattered was the outcome. He felt abandoned by the brother and the mentor he trusted most. To this day, the distance remains. After Death Row, Warren and Dre never really came together on a project again. Even decades later, the pain is still there. When Dre headlined the 2022 Super Bowl halftime show, surrounded by Snoop, Eminem, 50 Cent, Kendrick Lamar, and Mary J. Blige, Warren G was nowhere to be seen. For fans, it was shocking. For Warren, it was another wound. "I don't know what the F times SK is going on," he admitted afterward. What makes it worse is Dre's silence. While Warren, Snoop, and even Suge have all told their versions of the story, Dre has never publicly addressed it. By staying quiet, Dre protects his image, but it leaves the truth buried and leaves Warren's pain hanging in the air, unresolved. For Warren G, the brother he once loved and idolized became the first on his list of artists he could never forgive. Warren G's feuds were not limited to just artists. He also clashed with the business side of hip-hop, most notably with the very label he helped save, Def Jam Recordings, and they are #1 on our list. By the mid-90s, Warren G had already been burned by family and pushed out of Death Row. But his fight wasn't just with artists. His biggest war was with the business side of hip-hop itself. And the craziest part? He ended up clashing with the very label he once saved from dying. Back then, Def Jam was in serious trouble. The label that had given the world Run DMC, LL Cool J, and Public Enemy was falling apart. Russell Simmons later admitted, "We was dead. We was gone. They were drowning in debt, somewhere between $19 and $33 million, and nothing they signed was working." Liar Cohen, one of the top executives, even confessed that it was a terrifying time. He had lost his confidence and was watching one artist after another flop. Then Warren G showed up. Fresh off being sidelined by Dre and Suge, he walked into Def Jam with Regulate G-Funk era. Nobody at the label could have predicted what was about to happen. That record didn't just sell, it exploded. Between 4 and 6 million copies flew off shelves. And suddenly, Def Jam, a label that was on life support, was alive again. Warren G's success wiped away the debt and filled the company's pockets. Liar Cohen would later admit without hesitation, Warren G saving Def Jam is not a rumor. What makes the story even wilder is that Warren had no idea how bad things were at the time. He later learned they were literally swiping credit cards just to keep the lights on while promoting his music. In his own words, "They was doing my she with credit cards." For Warren, the relationship was mutual. "They saved me from going to jail," he once said, "and I saved them from crumbling as a company." But decades later, all that loyalty turned into bitterness. The bond that once looked unbreakable is now a bitter feud over money and ownership. Warren has been fighting to get his masters back, a battle so many veteran artists have had to take on. His frustration is raw. "They've been living off me for 30 years. Give me my masters. They told you I saved the company. What's the problem? Let me live now." On top of that, he has claimed that he hasn't even received proper royalty checks for some of his biggest works. We're talking about his contributions to the Above the Rim soundtrack, which was huge in the 90s, and his own album, I Want It All. To him, it feels like history repeating itself. The artist who gave his blood, sweat, and tears gets left out of the credit and the money while the machine keeps cashing in. For Warren G, the fight with Def Jam might be the most painful feud of them all. He wasn't just another artist on their roster. He was the guy who pulled them back from the grave, the guy who handed them one of their biggest lifelines. Yet here he is, decades later, still begging for what he feels is rightfully his.